right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Today with your host Bernhard Günther, and my very special guest today is Randy Maugans, host of the radio show Off Planet Radio. And his radio show, I believe you guys just had your 10th anniversary, and it's been going for a while, right?
Yes, that's this year, 2020. Yep.
Exactly. And I've been a big fan of the show for many years, and he and his partner, also Emily Moyer, cover many topics from the paranormal, spirituality, fringe science, alternative science, and anything. But I always appreciated your authenticity and integrity within your own work, right? And it's hard to come by sometimes today in this field of so-called alternative media, which, it's a swamp out there.
It is, yeah.
So anyway, first of all, welcome to the show, Randy. Thank you for
thank you for having me on, and for the kind words. Appreciate that.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you also, I remember coming across your podcast many years ago, and I remember you were one of the first ones had Eve Lorgan on and introduced me to her work many years ago, which helped me to process some of my own stuff, especially love by top relationship and all of that.
Yeah.
So you've been definitely groundbreaking veteran out there, and we have a lot to cover. So I want to dive into many different topics. But one of the things I would like to really, hear from you, maybe the listeners as well, your own personal journey. How did you, when you first found that splinter in your mind, so to speak, when you realize life is not what we have been told it's taught, and truth is actually stranger than fiction? And how did it lead you to create Off-Planet Radio?
The splinter in my mind. That's actually like a whole story in itself, because it kind of goes back to childhood and a lot of paranormal things that happened then. I had memories going back to 3 years old of contact with, we would call them maybe ETs. To me, that's not my concept at that time. UFO experiences from the time I was 11, intensely up through my teens, and my suspicions about being part of certain aspects of mind control programs as well. And going forward, there was a lot of years of healing. I was dealing with childhood sexual assault issues. And so I basically went through a real long, protracted period of healing, externally, internally, using whatever methods I could find, getting stable, kind of adapting to the matrix for a long time. From my 30s forward, I just kind of drifted for a long while, happy to have stabilized. But that splinter's always been there. It influences just about everything that I do in some way. I don't do things normally. I don't function normally. I don't think normally. And, I can be rather inappropriate at times. So the nexus for all of this was that in 2003, I had gone on numerous legs of spiritual journeys that landed me in different places and different disciplines along the line, including Christianity. And I was doing shortwave radio on a network out of Southern Oregon. Pretty interesting operation, actually. Did that for 7 years up until the time that we began, I say we, it was me, sort of launched Off-Planet Radio. And that was alternative Christianity that looked at things from a very different perspective than what we understand is brought out by the churches. But I reached a kind of terminus with that when I realized that what was being presented in these books they call the scripture were in fact on some level demiurge and war gods, and that we were pawns in a game that was basically designed to keep us in constant turmoil and conflict and fear and doubt, believing that we were sinners, believing that we were imperfect, and believing that we needed an external savior, which went right into Off-Planet Radio because the external the externalization of salvation is actually a big part of what I've worked on over the years, of basically identifying different programs, because they are programs that hook into us in a way to create this need for external validation of who we are and an external salvation process rather than focusing on the inner process. So that's kind of the nutshell of how we got to where we are in 2020 in terms of my personal arc.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing, Randy. So, because that's what you just mentioned at the end, that's also, I see what you mentioned a lot. A key point is like almost your tagline: the truth is out there and it's inside you.
Yeah.
Right. So you also realized early on, yes, we need to understand like the control mechanisms, the programming out there, but essentially it's also somewhat distracting us from what we need to like look within ourselves, to confront ourselves or to find the truth within ourselves and see how that actually also then quote unquote creates reality, right? In the even with all the distortions around reality creation, but there's something about tuning inside rather than getting distracted by this whole matrix mechanisms at the same time. It's almost a paradox, right?
It is a paradox. That slogan actually comes from me hybridizing the X-Files, the truth is out there, and the words of the person they call Yeshua or Jesus in the New Testament, who told us that the kingdom of God is within us. Yeah. That was actually the point where I transitioned away from established religious doctrine, because when I went back and I looked at, you have this book, this black cube called the Bible. And it's not really a book. It's a compilation of a lot of writings over a very long period of time. And I spent years dissecting it and analyzing it, looking at it, doing linguistic analysis, looking at Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic and trying to parse this thing out. And one day I read that one line, the kingdom of God is within you. And I went, well, what the hell else do you have to say after that? It kind of got real simple. It was like, okay, I think we got to the nub of this thing, so time to move on.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, I can relate to this in my own process as well. You have the disillusionment, your own almost paranormal experience. If there's something else out there controlling us, programming us, you can, interpret it in many other ways, be it ET, the demiurge, hostile forces, the hyperdimensional aspect, or manifest in the 3D matrix, as we know, whatever group, elite, Illuminati, whatever you want to focus on, but it's the same force, more or less, kind of that works through and acts through humans and then can also act through us, right?
Yeah.
And, especially if the Bible is interesting, because also I didn't have a Christian upbringing per se, but I also read the Bible, and it is interesting because there are hidden gems of esoteric truths hidden within it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to throw the baby out of the bathwater, so to speak, So what I'm just also curious, because as we just mentioned, you had your 10th anniversary of Off-Planet Radio. It's quite a long stretch, 10 years.
Yeah.
I know you had a show around it, but can you also encapsulate what you have seen, or experienced over the past 10 years in terms how the world has changed, not like externally, but also in the so-called alternative media, like the good, the bad, the ugly in the sense?
Yeah, it's been, well, the alternative media didn't really exist per se when I began doing all this. I think alternative media really took off around 2012. I think that's when we began to see a platform, largely because of YouTube, which universalized something that the media itself was kind of scattered. The original format for what we call podcasts, back in 2003, Dave Weiner and Adam Curry wrote the original models for what's called the RSS feed, which is really simple syndication, which created the mechanism to distribute media across the feed. I was following that and began writing code on a website to distribute podcasts. So podcasts were going, first they had nowhere to go. Then Apple came in and did iTunes which kind of became ground zero for podcasts for a long time. And then, of course, people began to discover WordPress and other blogging platforms that also had syndication. So the platform sort of developed over time in terms of media distribution, but I don't think anybody had a handle on it until it began to germinate this distinct sort of disclosure, woke type of meme. And you began to see alternative media gel around the truth movement. Mm-hmm. The truth movement, I have obviously going back much further. My experience with the truth movement goes back to the 90s, which was the Patriot movement in the United States. But then it goes forward after 9/11 into the deeper dives that people began to take into what actually happened on 9/11. And that dogleg back as well. In the early days, I was doing a lot of podcasts where we're going back and comparatively looking at conspiracy theories like the JFK assassination, or that whole series of events that happened in the 60s. So it began to gel around some very solid ideas that there were a group of people who were attempting to navigate a very broad field of information and come together with some concept of how badly we've been screwed with. And that then took on this alternative media persona. 2012, again, feels right to me because it was kind of that time when we're also dealing with the Mayan calendar and a lot of the ascension things. The spirituality stuff was coming through that as well. And it really began to gel because YouTube became a platform that people could access with great ease. I would say it's an addiction now, but YouTube sort of gelled all that. So it was a different world. I never considered that my show was popular. I have been shocked over the years who's heard the show and where they found it, because to me it felt like it was underground, which is a lot. Emily and I talk about this, and when we say alternative media, we identify as the underground. We're basically underground radio today. Mm-hmm. And what's become alternative media has, sadly, in the last 5 years, been so heavily co-opted by, if you look beneath the surface, major media outlets funding and financing what we think is underground alternative media, but in fact is a faction of the mainstream news that's now functioning on the same platforms that we started out on, largely through YouTube. Yeah. So it's more crowded now, and at the same time, it's also less diverse. That's the most amazing thing about it. It's also been used heavily in the last, I'll go back to 2016, 2017, but it probably even predates that, because I know even back in the days of the early forums, the internet was being used to aggregate people into what you would call cult movements. Mm-hmm. And so that's continued. But the field now, everything's changed a little bit. And unfortunately, because there's so many bad actors on the scene, so many devious characters, people that are clearly operating from a motivation of profit and service to self, there's a deep suspicion out there. I was quite surprised the other day on Twitter. I was actually attacked by somebody who called me a paid agent. And I went, well, that's funny, because for the last 10 years, I didn't see anybody paying my bills. It does cost a little bit of money to do this, and this has been a hobby for me. Nobody's ever paid me. I'm grateful because we have patrons on our Patreon site that support us, but I never even expected that. I just figured I'd just shovel out whatever it takes to keep going. Yeah. So it's a different landscape now. I think it's going to thin out, and we're already seeing attrition largely because of the platform itself being YouTube, which is, it's not sustainable. If you have a sufficiently heavy message of truth, you're going to get knocked back on YouTube pretty quickly these days. So it's a different landscape now. It requires a huge amount of discernment to navigate it. There's the concept of moving traffic in media, that we turn audiences over. So we're now in another generation, whereas my generation, which was sort of the very rear end of that post-war Woodstock 70s period, has now handed off to Generation X and the generations coming up. So we have an audience that's markedly younger than what I saw when I was doing shortwave radio. And these people are coming into this new. And this creates a tremendous amount of harvesting opportunities for certain assets, because they don't have the background that we have in terms of being able to look back over a very long sweep. So a lot of what I do now is try to point back to even my own early shows. I've been doing a lot of that, looking back at what I was doing earlier, because even I've forgotten sometimes and lost my own bearings. But it is a very different place. It's very difficult now to discern what is real, who is fake, who is being paid, and who's just simply an authentic voice out there.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. I see that as well. A lot of people even get a lot of messages how people have a hard time discerning what is truth, what is lies. And, people ask me, maybe ask you, and as if we're the authority and whatnot.
Right.
But you made a really good point, because I can see this as well. Back in the days when I'm a bit younger than you, but I also started out in the 90s, with truth seeking. And back then it was actually more, you had to really search and look, find books and read, or maybe.
Well, you would have come up in that era when David Icke was coming out.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I remember that's how I got VHS tapes from Icke's 9-hour talks.
Yeah. That's how I got
into that. There was Google Video back then, way before YouTube. There was no Facebook. But now it's like you said, it's more saturated. There's way more. It's an information overload right now, and people taking information in sound bites. Check out, like you mentioned, YouTube. Check out YouTube video here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes there. They see a post on Facebook and then almost get infected by it, not questioning it, and then it becomes almost, its own, like a virus, so to speak. And it can be easily hijacked and vector people away from what truly matters. And then also what you mentioned is interesting. We can see that as well in the alternative media has become like the mainstream media in many ways. It's like based on sensationalism, trying to get, listeners and whatnot. And people want to have, more, monetize their videos and all of that. And, sure, we all need to make a living, but then also the integrity goes down the toilet, so to speak, right? And what matters in the end of the day, right? And then you have, these big outlets like Gaia or Collective Evolution, who is became like a TV station in itself, right? Not very discerning, and it's really like literally it's like tuning into TV, of all the advertisement for certain shows and whatnot, and certain figureheads and whatnot, and that's why I feel sometimes. Even the term truth movement, I have more and more issues with that, because what is the truth movement? Right? And how do we define that?
Yeah, it's difficult to define, because our truth, I struggle with the term truth a lot. Because it's so subjective. And it shifts all the time. My truths now, or I will say, more defined than they were maybe 5 to 10 years ago. I don't think the fundamentals have changed much, but the perspectives and these little moments when you come across things and you have to remap a little bit because of new information. And it goes into this, how do you discern, how do you deal with a culture that's based on information and sound bites of such density now? I mean, I grew up in the era, and I grew up in a place where, we barely had television. We had radio. But the level of information density that we had in that time was nothing like what we have now, or the velocity of information, which is probably more important. When you subject yourself to, let's say, news feeds and the kind of media that we had when I was growing up as a kid, it was a trickle. We read books a lot more, obviously, which requires a certain reflexive mindset, some introspection, and visually scanning and taking information in a more proportionate manner. Now what we have, it's like somebody pulled the IV out and shoved a fire hose in your arm, and we are mainlining data and information at an unprecedented rate, much more than we can possibly process on a conscious level.
Yeah.
And it's been my concern, having grown up in this tech industry. I've worked in the tech industry. I've been around computers all of my adult life in some form. And, I sort of saw this coming, how this massive overload would occur, even in the days before the internet really took off. And it was Usenet feeds and mail lists and things like that. But I saw the information beginning to ramp up. What we have now with social media is just this system that is pumping massive amounts of not just information, but emotional content, bypassing our conscious minds. And the influence of a digital medium like this is that so much is passing through us like current that we don't consciously process, but we're still taking it in, that in the subconscious somewhere, most of this is working out. And it's why you now see people losing their shit online in real time, because quite frankly, the velocity of information is too great for them to intake and process.
It's like the Pavlovian dog response too.
Exactly. Or Delgado's bulls, even worse. it just jam the electrodes in the brain.
Yeah. But it's interesting. So we're dealing actually with with another paradox. Like, more information is out there, seemingly like you can reach more people with social media. The truth spreads faster, so to speak, right? So most people, it gives almost, because I've contemplated on that as well, but even social media has changed. Facebook has changed. Remember the early days, there was basic algorithm. I see the feeds of everyone, doesn't matter. It wasn't, based on my interest. And now, the algorithm, it almost gives, I feel, the illusion that more people are waking up because only people that see your posts are people who already have the same interest, so to speak, more or less. It's starting to preach to the choir. While you think, more and more people are actually waking up, and that's not the case, right?
Yeah. The algorithms are designed to morph and change, whereas in the early days of computing, software upgrades were very deliberate, they were very staged, they were done over a period of time. And I know this because as somebody who's been on both sides of software, I can tell you that one of the goals is that you never want to disturb the user experience to the degree that they can no longer operate within the system. Anybody that's ever had a major software upgrade and gets up and looks at their computer and doesn't know where things are or how they function anymore experiences this. It's a distortion. And now the rapidity of software updates is so invisible that literally sometimes Facebook or Twitter are changing major aspects of the interface and the algorithms behind them on the fly, literally as you're using it. We're no longer in an era where there's staged upgrades anymore. It's an ongoing shift of algorithms and software, which creates a distortion field.
Yeah.
I have speculated that this is actually part of mind control, that they want this. They want us unsteady on our feet, so to speak. They want us in a constant state of disruption while interacting with this software, because it enables them to not only change the experience, but then feedback mechanism calculate exactly what the response is to all this, so that in a sense, there's no longer beta testing of software. People don't know what beta testing is. That's the stage before the release of a piece of software. We're now real-time beta testers in a constant software evolution.
Yeah.
which creates this distortion field in interacting with these interfaces online.
Yeah. Yeah, and it ties also into what, I've talked about it as well, how all this, again, the paradox, this technology, social media connects us more, we can communicate more, but it keeps us more glued to the screen. It keeps us head-centric, disconnected from our, bodies, from our feelings. We're just always looking, and even like, I can see it in myself, when you're upset, you post something like this armchair activism, it gives people a release, like, oh my God, fuck the psychopaths, or, and this, like it gives you the illusion you have done something just because you're posting it, and people get upset and almost support each other's pathologies and narcissism in so many other ways. And we saw that recently, I think we're on the same page, you have posted about that as well, this whole Ricky Gervais phenomenon, when he, a Golden Globe, he dropping truth bombs, everyone, yay, finally and it's been going like a virus on Facebook. But now you can already see it's already forgotten, more or less, right? And
exactly, the news cycle moved.
Exactly.
That ran for a couple of days.
Yeah, and that's
the night of the Golden Globes, and then there was about a 48-hour cycle on that one, and there was response. And Gervais himself online on Twitter is posting. And what he's basically saying, it was a fucking joke.
Yeah.
You don't know what a joke is.
Yeah.
So what he did in his Twitter post was he completely disarmed the perception that he was dropping truth bombs.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
People who looked behind the scenes at this analytically would realize, first off, what a controlled environment the Golden Globes are, just like any staged awards program, any media that appears on your screen. Most people don't look behind the screen to see that there's a director there, that there are camera directors, there are sound crew, there are teleprompters. Gervais' speech was on the teleprompter.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
basically, it was fed in by somebody that at least had access to and would have theoretically seen the content of that. So what was Gervais doing, in my opinion? Well, if you look at the camera angles, if you look at them panning to Tom Hanks, for instance, they know what the scuttle is out there about Hollywood and their involvement with human trafficking and pedophilia. And they're very aware of the perception and how they can play this. And at some point, what they do is they create a distortion field within that thought bubble. And that's what Gervais was doing. I mean, this is dirty comedy. This is the kind of comedy that you get at a roast. This is effectively you having the ability as the court jester to roast the royal figure sitting there with impunity, because that's the role of the jester.
Exactly.
The Joker. Isn't that interesting? The Joker figure shows up again. We had the Joker movie. So this disarmed people, and it went both ways. I mean, it created conflict because some people saw through it immediately, but it created conflict for people who wanted this. People want a champion. They want somebody to stand up and speak for them. And it sounded like that was what he was doing.
Yeah.
But he was installing a program of cognitive dissonance into the entire conversation that disarmed the major premise of it. I mean, Harvey Weinstein was being arraigned. Harvey Weinstein was going to jail. The president's being impeached. All of these names are circulating on different lists inside of Hollywood, and people are being arrested. It's just not the mass arrests or the high-level arrests that I think people hope to see. So in the bed of all this, Gervais interjected this virus and disrupted the entire thought flow. And for 48 hours, we argued about it. And then it was like, it's done, Yeah. And what's left is a subliminal impression.
Exactly how it happened many times before, because you're right, like people have this, they're like caught in hope. Hope and fear. So they hope that somebody finally is going to reveal the matrix. Everything's going to be broken down. All these psychopaths going to be arrested, and this externalization constantly. Right?
It's a savior program.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the movie Network. We want a Howard Beale to stand up and scream out the window, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore."
Yeah.
Brilliant movie, great message. but it was an externalization of what we should be doing. We should have all been Howard Beals. Instead, we went looking for a central figure to be Howard Beale.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, it basically it's a psyop in this terms of it works like reverse psychology, you know? And, like many people I feel also they're not aware of, especially nowadays who just the kids get into it, like the short attention span, which is also installed on purpose, right? Inability to focus and jump from information to information, the analysis paralysis, you cannot discern anymore. You just become reactive in all of that, right? And not being able to really see even like the distraction, because for me, from my perspective, even the whole Weinstein thing, the Epstein thing, these are just minute shadows on the wall, like almost they're throwing us bones to give the impression, right, that something is falling apart, while this whole control system, and we know this whole pedophilia, Hollywood just goes way deep into far darker corners than most people are aware of.
Yeah, even Jeffrey Epstein, that's kind of a controlled narrative. What really happened there is as mysterious as the JFK assassination. Mm-hmm. What really happened? We don't know. Yeah. Because mysteriously, the cameras didn't work, security didn't work, and supposedly he's dead. Yeah. Witness disappeared.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just this focus, like, I want to bring it back because, like, what we just mentioned before, it's also a distraction from our inner world, right? And what I've noticed, I'm sure as well, that many people, many truthers, woke people, and I'm not excluding myself, I've done this in my life sometimes, projecting your own dissatisfaction with yourself, your own unconscious wounds, whatever, onto the outside world, right? The evil is out there, bring those fuckers down and all of that, kill the psychopaths, whatever it may be, then even like misapplied anger, like then justifying as righteous anger when it's most often your own shadow coming out, right?
There's that, yes.
There's that as well,
Yeah.
And we don't want to it's not about going the opposite, like the other trap, the New Age trap, and just, meditate on your navel and disregard the external world, but there's a lack of basic psychological awareness, self-awareness, right?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of projection that goes on there because we are projecting our shadow sides. We are projecting our images of who we are, who we perceive ourselves to be relative to everyone else. And that shadow plays into a magnification of the evil we see around us. So we become angry because we feel like we're out of control, and the whole narrative is designed to keep us unbalanced and feeling like we're out of control, like we have no ability to affect change in a meaningful way. And this is where the advantage of having time and experience pays out, because, you asked me earlier about the last 10 years. And my perspective would be, well, what about the last 40 years? Because I think things have changed phenomenally. And I do think awareness has been raised. And I do think that overall people are more perceptive now. The war is on perception and consciousness because perception and consciousness has risen. Mm-hmm. And people have to remember that. The only reason you're in a war is because there was something there that needed to be taken down. And they have some marvelous toys to play with, and the technology is part of that. But the technology also empowered us. So when people complain about, and I do it too, because there's a component to technology I don't like. But when people complain about the technology, I point out to them, this technology first empowered us. It gave us a place to speak. And if it was YouTube, fine, it was YouTube. For a while, we were able to use that. Is it going to be locked down? Absolutely. Is it going to be commercialized? Yes. Is it going to be co-opted? It always has been. But we put that out there into the menosphere. That thought is persistent. And it's not going to go away. And it's going to sit there and it's going to germinate. And it's going to throw itself against this background of conflict that we have. And hopefully, ultimately, it prevails as a magnification of the truth. So everything that we do is important in terms of putting it out there and not feeling defeated because the tanks came in and ran down the front lines.
Yeah.
It's really important.
No, it's true. I think that's also, I can see people complain about Facebook, on YouTube, but at the same time, you're signing up to these free services. You enter their game, so you're subjected to the rules of their game. So you cannot complain, technically speaking anyway. And like you said, it still helps to bring out the word. And I feel that's how the Matrix, so to speak, works as well. Even with Edward Snowden and all, I feel in the cyber in itself to tell us, oh, you're being watched, you're being, surveillance and all of that. Be afraid, be paranoid, don't put yourself out, don't speak, right? It's almost that the Matrix works on this fear frequency to make you feel you're constantly under, surveillance, so to speak. But if enough people speak out, the more you put yourself out there, they cannot possibly control it. It's almost, they also like to give us the illusion of control to silence us in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, we are under surveillance. We've always been under surveillance.
Yeah.
When you go back and you start to look at the ancient systems, you begin to understand the archons and what the Gnostics were telling us. When you start to understand that you were given an image of a God who knows everything about you, what part of surveillance society don't you get? I mean, even Santa Claus, you're a little kid, you're growing up, and he's going, well, he knows everything about you, and you're going to get a lump of coal in your stocking this year because you weren't a good little boy and girl. They've installed that paranoia into us.
That's a very good point because, sometimes people I see they're very much overly focused on the 3D matrix, right? With that paranoia program. And, that paranoia program also, you create that thought form, that reality in itself, and actually then create it on some level or attract it to yourself, because how these forces create through us. Not understanding, the moment you're on the internet, nowadays, there's technology out there, they can know anything about you. You don't even have to be, it's not about I'm going to delete my Facebook, get off YouTube. No, they can see and know anything based on the technology, and let alone what you just mentioned from a hyperdimensional perspective, archons who working through our minds, scanning us, ET technology, who knows? It's way beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, I mean... And this is where interactions with the paranormal are useful, when you begin to understand the telepathic aspect of it, when you understand that something's scanning you. Yeah. And that was part of what the projects were dealing with as well. Intelligence operations have always wanted to be able to access telepathic function. That was a lot of what went into Stanford Research Institute's background experiments into remote viewing and bringing people in who were psychics, like Ingo Swann. The military has been very interested in this. The truth of the matter is that we've always been interested in it because it's always been there. We are psychic beings. Somehow or another, and I don't know where this occurred, but when I was doing my alternative Christian thing, I looked at the Tower of Babel thing and I went, you know what? The perfect way to accomplish scattering people and making them not understand each other isn't scattering their tongues, it's taking away their telepathic functions. See, the whole ET meme brought that back into reality because people who have had ET contacts experiences know, they know pretty much when you're being scanned. You even probably have a pretty good idea of when you're going to be abducted, because there is that presence that comes over that happens, around that time. There's an energy, there's an invasion. The various cycles of sleep where they're able to begin to access you. And so if they shut down an aspect of our consciousness that disabled or semi-disabled our telepathic abilities, we're sort of functioning on a reduced level. But I've been in the mindset for a long time that a lot of this was being restored. Like my sense of where we are in time goes into what was occurring after the Second World War and why we wound up with the structure that we have in the United States, which formalized into the military-industrial complex and gave us all of these different spook agencies and black science stuff. We were in a time when we were literally starting to see the incarnation, the influx of souls coming in who were prepared to retake the ground that was lost in those earlier epochs when our DNA was messed with, when our innate capabilities psychically were taken from us. And I mean, this goes back again to when I was a kid. Even my own mother used to tell me that people could be psychic. She was pretty psychic. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's never been a stretch to believe that we have the ability to perceive on that level. So all of the technology that we have now that we know about and a lot of what's behind the scenes is a synthesis of something that we don't need technology for at all.
Yeah.
You know, jokingly one time somebody said, so what if they take the internet down? How would you do a radio show? And I went, well, maybe we'll just do it telepathically. But why not?
Yeah.
Why couldn't a group of people mind meld and communicate? Yeah. And in fact, I think we do that. I've had dreams and I've had conversations online with other people who collectively are beginning to dream together, who are beginning to access a common mind that enables them in some way to collaborate intuitively.
Yeah. No, I can see it even like on a very basic level, like many people can relate, even with my wife, Laura. We have a very strong psychic connection. I think something, and she says it, and it's very simple. We're just very much in tune. This is just there. You can develop it. And that reminds me again, another paradox, like you mentioned before. Yes, the technology has helped us in so many ways, but it's also this externalization of technology has disconnected us from our inner technology.
Yes.
Right? And the illusion, oh, we are so advanced, evolved, look at all this technology. And we look at these ancient civilizations eradicated from our history books, we don't see any or has been suppressed archaeological findings and whatnot, but they had internalized technology, mastery over the psyche, over physical reality in many different ways. And, even like if you really pursue like a sincere spiritual practice, you can develop spiritual powers, cities of, yogis to be known to travel time, remote viewing, these are latent talents we can all develop, but we need to go inside in order to develop them. We're not going to find them out there, so to speak. So all of that, obviously, like, let's get into that a little bit, ties into the dawning of transhumanism and AI. So where do you feel is that leading us to?
I think they've been attempting this for a very long time. I think they've been attempting it going back to the MK Ultra projects and the super soldier programs. Mm-hmm. And I know some of these people. I know that they were augmented in certain ways. I know that they were paired with certain groups of people telepathically, using both natural abilities and a synthesis of technology as well. Lots of implants, lots of augmentation, genetic re-engineering. Those were the earliest experiments in the modern era that we have of this. And it's very clear that what they want is they want a human robotic. They want increasingly to take down the organic human experience, which is the experience of the soul. Yeah. The experience of a human being at their very core, which is not controllable, it's not predictable. And then the AI comes in, and I have to stress, when people talk about artificial intelligence, they give it a lot more power than I think it deserves to have. It is still artificial. Mm-hmm. And as nearly as I can tell based on the technology that I can look at, they have developed extremely sophisticated algorithms to do enormously, frankly, useful things in some regards, things that I'm grateful for it. I work in computer-aided design and manufacturing, and I'm grateful for the little robots that enable us to do things that we couldn't do as fast or at the level of precision that these machines do them. In that sense, they have relieved us of a certain level of drudgery, and they have also enhanced our abilities to create things at a very high level. You know, 3D printers is fantastic technology. So I'm not a technophobe. The AI that we believe is being developed that would be sort of like the Elon Musk brain chip implant, that's the scary stuff. And the question becomes, what do we do once it's inserted inside of us? So we're still dealing with a physical layer to this. I don't see any way around that. We are being controlled by algorithms all around us now. Our traffic lights, our electrical grids, every system in the Western world is run by computer systems now. In a way, that's good because it can be very efficient. But we don't want to we do not want to cede control of these things to the degree that they begin to operate as proxies for what should be rightfully human decisions, which are the decisions that come from inside of us. The soul is the very center of where we operate. It's not the head. Yeah. You said it earlier. They keep putting us back inside of our head. Our head is simply a receiver. It's not even where our mind is. The brain itself is not the mind. And so we're looking at a thing and we're mistaking it for something that sits behind it, which is much more difficult to track. I said this in an interview in December. What is the you that views the you that sees the you? Because there's three levels to this, the observational level. There's a consciousness layer. And Emily and I talked about this in the end of the year show, and I said, at the end of the day, the only thing I have ever had to talk about is the primacy of consciousness. Yeah. Is being able to functionally identify who we are inside this construct. And if we stay focused on that, if we develop a sense of ourselves, if we develop spiritual practices and a sense of relating to our physical space, of continuing to embody ourselves in a very real sense, the danger of AI really goes way down. I don't have a fear of it. I have a fear of the fact that people want this, and I think that's a bigger danger.
Yeah. Now, these are excellent points around here that brings up a lot. Number one, people are very much attracted to it because also the obsession nowadays with you, with your physical body, right? And even AI or transhuman can actually have amazing medical breakthroughs, but it can also become this addiction to extend physical life and just make yourself younger and all of that. So that's the entry point, right? But you said a very important point to remember, because I'm also not a technophobe. You don't want to get into fear of, oh, my AI, transhumanism, it's a big evil and fuck technology and all of that. But you said it's still artificial, and we have our organic, quote-unquote, technology, our soul essence, which can and will override everything if we can tune into it. Then, I see, unfortunately, a lot of people in the so-called truth movement also throwing out spiritual practice, the baby with the bathwater, right? Like meditation is also bad, yoga is bad, and it can be used for mind control, we know that, or dissociation, spiritual bypassing, but there's esoteric technology, literally, where you tune into and bring your soul to the front and activate, your DNA, basically. And, that ties also into with transhumanism AI, the whole talk about chemtrails, 5G, and all fear around it, right? There's to be some awareness around it, but I also feel like people then wear all these shields, like you become like the the archetypal tinfoil thing, with trying to shield yourself and all of that. That's fine and good. But I also feel like if you really embodied your soul and really rise that frequency on that level, in the true meaning of the word, of bringing your soul to the front, that serves as a protection as well from these artificial interferences. If you really, embody your true soul being, that's the way out of the matrix, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. You could literally begin to build shield systems in the light body.
Yeah.
And I've talked about that before, and I've had a fair amount of criticism from people who think that that's occult. Okay, that's occult, but let's look at occult for a minute. What does that mean? That's just hidden.
Yeah.
Do you fear what's hidden, or do you seek what's hidden? Is what hidden is it evil, or is it something that you search out? So when we define something as occult, that's assigned some order of darkness, but that's not really what that's about. We can protect ourselves in enormously different manners of just staying out of the field of certain. I mean, there's just places I don't want to be. Yeah. I can't. I love music. I can no longer go to a rock concert.
Me too.
because when I go there, I'm very aware of the directed energy that's A, being directed at the crowd itself, and B, the harvesting that's going on from the Loosh Fest that's these mass events.
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that would, back in the day, loved going to see Pink Floyd or something like that. No way you get me near that now.
Yeah.
Because of the intensity of the energy. So that's a protective mechanism. Building our bodies, again, using just practices of breath and calming and meditation, and just being able to take control of our internal and immediate external domain, being aware of what's going on around us. We have the ability to shut things down.
Yeah.
And this is where the human empowerment comes in. Again, we live in a world that is somewhat toxic. We always have. I mean, we were plunked down in a world where, we don't have hair on us for whatever reason. We're the naked animal. And we live in a world full of temperate zones that, that'll either fry you or freeze you. So we survive. The human biology is also very adaptable. So when we deal with it on those layers, we begin to see that, while it would be really nice if we didn't have to combat the hits that we take energetically, we also do have the ability to defend. We do have the ability to evolve ourselves internally and externally to deal with the stress that these systems are putting on us.
Yeah, exactly. Then also keep in mind what we touched upon before, how I feel the Matrix works to keep us in this state of fear and paranoia and externalization. And if you're afraid of 5G, of chemtrails, that's the frequency they want. That's what they feed off of, right? And then you project your own stuff externally, your shadow and all of that. And it also ties into this, we see as well, the whole divide and conquer. That's kind of like the underlying agenda, from a harvesting perspective, to pit us against each other and be this emotional outrage and all of that, which we talked about before as well. And that's really what it comes down to, that we are being fed upon our soul essence, so to speak. That's kind of like on the very basic simplistic level, really the agenda in whatever ways they can get to it, right, externally.
Yeah, and everything's kind of distorted. I mean, the divide and conquer thing is done all the time. That's they slice and dice us according to our differences. And we have a world which then politicizes all that, so that things that are legitimate become like social justice warrior type things, where people become militant and lose the focus of what it was they were speaking out about. And the Me Too movement, which was valid, but then got trivialized and marketed in a certain way, so that it again lost its resonance, its true core. Mm-hmm. It goes back to Ricky Gervais again. How our thought processes are derailed and then we're splintered.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a time, and you and I both, I think, agree on this. There are times when you call people out. There are times when there is an enemy camp out there. There are people screwing with other people's perceptions, with creating cult-like atmospheres, and quite frankly, running businesses on top of spirituality. That's not to say that spiritual teachers shouldn't be paid and that they shouldn't be rewarded. But I think we saw this, and I'll just say it, with the whole Corey Good thing, was, quite frankly, that needed to be called out because that was an atrocity against the entire movement.
No, I agree. Yeah.
But at the same time, am I going to divide and split her off with people that basically I agree with when about 80 to 90% of most things? No. I mean, we have to agree in enough commonality to be able to approach the work from a constructive standpoint.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point, and I want to maybe get deep into that in the second hour as well. But you're right, the differentiation, divide and conquer, doesn't mean just we need to not speak out or just try to get along with everyone. No, we need to also be in the warrior attitude, right? And the sword of truth sometimes calls a spade a spade. I think it has just become, and Corey Good is a great example. I've spoken out, David Wilcock, the same.
Yep.
That whole movement that ties into the whole commercialization of the alternative media, basically, right? It becomes like a Star Wars movie, literally, in some aspects. But I think what I've also noticed, though, the fine line is, and we saw it in the Me Too movement and the exposure of pathological gurus and all of that, and the social justice warrior attitude, when it turns into, when your own agenda, your own unprocessed issues get mixed into calling out other people, right? Yeah. And then it becomes like fueled by your own anger and revenge and take this person down rather than, no, this is what's, staying more grounded. This is not an integrity. This needs to be looked at. There needs to be accountability, but not getting too attached into like, okay, I'm going to now call everybody out, whoever's not speaking truth according to me, right? So it's that fine balance. And like you said, you need to call it, and also this is what it is. I'm not going to invest it into more on that, right? And move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent, Randy. So let's take a short break before we dive into the second hour. I want to talk, just let the listeners know, I want to dive deeper into like also what this year and the coming times will bring, 2020, what you call the eye of the needle. I want to also talk more about a little bit, reality creation and the individual taking self-responsibility, what is truth and lies, and look a bit more also a little bit into this swamp called ET disclosure and contact.
Yeah,
and whatnot.
that one.
Yeah. And again, if you're a member, the second hour is available on my website. If not, you can sign up at veilofreality.com. And Randy's website, you have a Patreon webpage as well, right?
That's probably where we should send people now. The website's become very outdated, and we're trying to work to update that. Patreon.com/Off Planet Media. And the website is offplanetradio.com for future reference, because we will bring that back to be the platform again.
Excellent. And I'll also link to that in the info section. All righty, guys.
Thank you.
See you in the second hour.